Bly, Hillman, and Meade answer questions and comment on the previous section of the Firebird story. Robert Bly follows with a talk entitled The Hunger for the King in a Time with No Father, The Hunger for the Father in a Time with No King.
I want to give you one idea here on the Firebird to the woman. The feather, then to the Firebird, and one would think to be satisfied with this image of the Firebird forever. It's so wonderful. Why not? And strangely enough, it shifts in some way. Now, the young man is moving on a huge journey. And I'm going to mention something that John Layard talked about, that all of us are moving on a journey from the law where we were brought up to the legends. We are moving from the practical world to that wild, incredible world where anything can happen. Do you hear me? We're moving from a school to some place where there's genuine wild learning. We're moving from a place where we understand everything to a place where we don't understand anything. Right. So therefore, on your deathbed, you'd be astounded. You don't even know where you are. Now, this is Layard's idea. In order to move from that to that, the man cannot do it alone. A female figure has to appear. And that female figure, Layard says, will have two faces. One faces toward this ordinary world and one faces the other world. And this is the woman that's just appeared. Now, that still doesn't solve anything. It just says his speculation is in the psyche. At the time you're really ready to move, a female figure will appear who sees both ways. Now, she may appear at the same time in your life as a woman you like tremendously. But that would be something only God could handle. The basic thing is that will appear, that being will appear. So we're just saying if for example, you have this a longing for staying in this world, she won't appear. If you're anti-female constantly, you want to do everything through the male mode, she won't appear. Chances are she won't. So we're talking about here that in the psyche, we have to use the crossover system. And the male thing is tremendously important, and the dawn and a certain time when the female comes, it is really important to do the thing we most dearly want. If that weren't so, we would fall apart. But the sexes are bound. And the guesses are that when a woman is in this quest and she gets at that point, a male figure has to appear who sees both ways. And if she's too anti-male, nothing's going to happen in her life. Does this make any sense to you? Yes. We're just throwing it out. Now watch where it goes the next time when we go down to the gown. Yep.
I want to add one thing about the king also. Notice that his imagination, the imagination of the king, goes from, it's the king's imagination that goes from the feather to the mysterious, thunderous storm of the Firebird. And then immediately from that, and that's brought to him at the center. King sits at the center, and then his imagination goes to the very edge of the world. And then the next step is the imagination goes from the very edge of the world into the very darkest part of the bottom of the sea. If you're interested in all of those old stories, that's the night sea journey. So it's the imagination of the king that covers the entire realm. The one other thing is, as Robert's saying, when this feminine quality comes in, that feminine quality starts making the demands. The whole sense of desire has moved from the king to now she picks it up and says, what I desire is at the bottom of the sea, although his imagination is flowing there too.
That's nice.
Yeah, her imagination takes you deeper.
Okay.
Whoa.
Her imagination takes you deeper.
That's right. He goes to the edge.
His imagination goes to the edge, as far out as you can go. But hers wants to go take it down.
Okay. To use some of the images Robert was using to begin the day, if the first section has a lot of the aspect of the warrior in it, in particular, when the horse of power pins the Firebird with its hoofs of iron, that's an image of the warrior. Force is being used. Now, it doesn't say that he damaged it and all that stuff, but force is the method. And that's fine. And that gets him through that test, or that challenge, whatever you want to call it. The next one, force will not work. It's exactly what I was talking about with Latima. This forcefulness has to be at one point stepped away from, and now if you want to follow it through the archetypes, it requires now the attention and the admiration and the appreciation of the lover. And this tent set up on the grass by the sea is the image of the garden of the lovers. And you see it's wrapped in story images. The imagination is surrounding the two of them. Inside, they're looking into each other's eyes, and it's called, the Irish used to call it the conversation with the loved one. And they're drinking from each other's eyes while they drink from the wine, while they're wrapped in silver and gold, the moon and the sun, and surrounded by images from legends and myths.
And there's another detail in the Iron John story. After the descent into the kitchen, he goes to see the king, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then he's exchanged for the gardener's boy. And then he works in a walled garden. And I don't know how old you'll be before you will achieve a walled garden around you. That means that you respect your boundaries, you know about your boundaries, you don't go in and out with other people all the time. You have a wall around you in which you grow precious pear trees and beautiful things of that sort. And that's where the lovers meet, is inside that garden. So it can be said it doesn't matter how many love affairs you have, if you don't know how to make or live in a walled garden, then you're going to split and everything is going to split. Because the lovers meet in the walled garden.
That's nice. Before the force is used, he lures the birds with the planting of the corn.
Yeah.
So, and he also, by decorating that tent and setting up his place there, he lures she drifts ever closer. So there's something to do there with not going after it, but knowing how to getting the ground ready, knowing how to make it attractive. And it's both making more fertility or making it more beautiful or being more receptive, something like that, for it to come to you.
That's good. Another way to see the two images is the field with the tree in the center and the storm arriving is a classic old image for the field of conflict. As soon as they say field with a tree in the center, it's through in all the Welsh stories, and it's through a lot of North European mythology. That means this is the field of conflict. It's another announcement that this is a warrior move. Whereas, just as Robert is saying, when it's the area of the lover, it is safe, it is covered with beauty, and it is protected, and it is intimate. So it's a completely different territory that happens, and you can also see both as ritual arrangements. The luring is the setting up of the ritual territory, you could say.
And I think one of the implications here is that if you try to hold a woman by pinning down her wings, that is not going to work. That once you have the walled garden, the woman or the man, whoever it is you love, will be willing to stay in there. And will want the oldest of liquors. Very nice. So we brought up the garden, the walled garden. The walled garden is a place where at a certain point in your life you begin to form it. And that's where the lovers meet, and that's where your lover will feel safe. If you don't have a walled garden, it's possible that your lover will not feel safe. So the question is, what are we going to have? How do you make?
Yeah. How do you make a walled garden where desire can enter? Desire may be very small, where the lover can enter, where intimacy can enter, where sacredness can enter, where quietness, how do you begin to construct a walled place or walled garden?
You may have to get a place in your house where that could be. Someone said to me in the break, I don't feel any desire in my life, I don't have any. So, what is that? Well, one could say you can't expect desire to come on you like a lightning now. That when you were very small, you had desires and you spoke them, and your parents did not respond. And he said, no, they suppressed them. So then, is that right? If you don't get a response from the outer world, the sniff starts to die. So one thing that you can do now is that you begin to look at the tiny desires you have. You have a tiny desire to paint something, and you go and get the watercolors and you do that, because it'll trust you if you follow the little ones. One of the things that Michael and James and I noticed when we first began to do this work is all the complaining about the Father, and it comes out to the statement, there isn't enough Father. For most men in this room, they haven't had enough Father. And I said it's like the Father were salt or something that gets in short supply, or like a water table that starts to drop. And the Father water table has dropped below where we can pick any of it up. What happens then? And I was saying, what do you do when the Father water table goes down? Do you try to drill with big drills for some more Father? Do you take mother water and try to distill it into Father water? That's the situation we're in. So then I'll mention this book by Mitscherlich, the German psychoanalyst who is so marvelous. It's called Society Without the Father. A couple of details that he found working for 40 years with young German men in the industrial society. One is, if you do not see your father at all, I mean the father is gone partly because 140 years ago he went into the factories and offices and you don't see him. That's what seemed to be a small thing. Mitchell says no. The men that I work with, if they have not seen their father work at all times of the year and all times of the day, a hole appears in the son's psyche. And into that hole does not come daisies and little rabbits. Into that hole comes demons. And the demons are demons, among other things, of suspicion of older men. So when you have these young men who have so little father around them, they're often rather mild, and they don't seem to show much rage on their faces. But Mr. Litch says if you look inside the psyche, it is full of demons, and those demons are ones telling them that your father is evil actually, and all older men are evil. Marathon Man with Dustin Hoffman is about that. So it's inside that placid exterior is this real fear of demons and fear of older men. Do you understand how difficult it would be for him to get a mentor? If he got a mentor, how he'd fight with him within a month? How difficult it is to attach himself to the world of men? Do you feel that? That's the isolation of the young man in the time when there is not enough father. Well, another thing he mentions, which is quite frightening, is that in the society without the father. Now, when there's a father there, you know where the authority is. The father comes in, the group father called the king, or the private father comes in. The group father in Germany has got big stairs you walk up, and he's got gold carriages, and he's got a lot of people around him. You can see exactly where that power is. And if you want it, you kill him and take it. That's called revolutions. It's the way it's always been done. In your family, you know where your father is. He's got the power. You take it. That's the father-son society that we've lived in for 100 million years. Mr. Litch is saying, I have news for you. When the father disappears, and remember Jeffrey Gore wrote a book called The Americans in 1940. He came over from England and he said, in order to become a man in the United States, only one thing is necessary: to reject your father. That's all. Easily done. Done every day in the comic strips. Done every day in the television advertisements when the fathers are always stupid. Do you hear me with this? Those things are written by young men rejecting their fathers. So therefore, in the United States, the tradition always has been, your father's absurd and ridiculous. There's no need to pay attention to him. He's a fat old thing, does all that ridiculous material. All you have to do is reject him and you'll be a man. Well, so we are the leaders in the society without the father. Now, one of the things he notices is, when the father is gone, everyone becomes a sibling. A sibling is a word for brothers and sisters. When the father is gone, everyone is a sibling. But the trouble is that in the sibling society, you can't tell where the authority is. Because the siblings don't want authority. And they don't want the responsibility of authority. This is what's happening in the art world. No one is willing to be a great artist and say anything that's true. Do you hear me on that? And so because that requires authority and responsibility, and you look into the bureaucracy, who's in charge? Nobody. It's a sibling society, the bureaucracies. So it's a terrifying thing because, first of all, power is considered to be a bad thing and authority is considered to be a bad thing, so you give it to Quayle. He couldn't have gotten it unless lots of people didn't want it. Do you hear me? So, and we can feel how that sickness started in the 60s, in which teachers were told, you're not supposed to teach, that's too hierarchical. Please get all your students in a circle. The women will tell you how to do it. And then, you all agree. What do you all want to study? Nothing. Okay, that's what we're going to study. Sandal making, huh? Let's have sandal making. So that's what happens when the hierarchical society that everyone hates goes. You end up with siblings, none of whom want authority, and then anyone with a mind of a nitwit can come in and do it. So it's scary stuff. Do you hear me with this? Yeah. Another thing that Mr. Litch says, which is even worse, is that in general, his experience of the young men that he saw without the fathers, when they don't have any conception of getting it up there, going up there, attacking or anything, they look sideways. They don't look up. They look sideways at other men their age. That's all they know is other men their age. The rule in psychology, you can't learn anything from the men your own age, because you all know the same nothing. Or you all know the same something. But the older men know something you don't, and so on and so on and so on. Well, the scariest thing then, it's possible in the sibling society, what people want is a higher standard of living. They don't want power. They don't want to change the society either, because that requires power in taking it. They want a higher standard of living. So the depressing possibility in places like Hungary is that this is not a father-son revolution going on, it's a VCR revolution going on. I'm not saying that that's true. I don't know because they're different than us. All right, let's go on then. We're talking about the hunger for the king in a time with no father. Now, when the father disappears, and you don't have we can say, for example, that there's 3 layers of the king. The upper layer is a layer in which the king is in the immortal or eternal world. There's a world up here called the mythological world, the mythological layer. That's where Dionysius is. That's where Hera is. That's where Jesus is. That's where Mary is. You understand me? In the Middle Ages, everyone went up and lived in that layer as much as they could. Campbell's work all has to do with that layer up there. And I just want to tell you there's a king on that layer too. Eternal king. King eternally. He's the Sun King in China. They love that king. He's not in this world. Joseph Campbell says, around the year 1000, the whole mythological layer collapsed. After that, we have only 2 layers left. We have the king on the political level. The king on the political level is the one that's called the Tsar, and is called the king, the Kaiser, the emperor, the Shah, all the way through Europe up until the late 18th century. This king was visible to everyone. And someone mentioned in the Middle Ages people would go out and simply wait there for the king to go by. Michael mentioned that too. And this king was clearly visible and was there. Now, this king originally got a lot of his power from the Sun King that came down to him. He was the earthly representative. Do you see that? That layer took energy from the upper layer. When we imaginatively collapsed and allowed the upper layer that stripped a lot of the energy away from the political king. Do you hear me? Finally, here we got rid of him in 4th of July, and a few years later the French cut his head off. Around 1840 he disappeared everywhere. He was simply gone. Political king vanished. Not there anymore. Look at the European history, gone. We felt very good about that. But we forgot to notice one thing. The political king was shielded and helped by the energy from the mythical king. When the mythical king disappears, it falls on the political king. He can't sustain it anymore. He doesn't have any connection with God or the sun or anything. He collapses, and that exposes the fathers to danger. Do you hear me? Then the next thing is that the fathers are wiped out. You see, it's interesting that when a man came into the house at a certain time, we're not saying that this thing was wrong. I'm trying to make you understand that. We're not saying the king killing was wrong. We're trying to describe what happened. When your father came in 1810 and sat down at the table, behind him would be the power of the political king in his country and all the dignity connected with that. And you saw it when he sat down. And behind that would be the dignity of the mythological king, whom you also saw. So James and Michael, and we've always mentioned this problem, that the dissatisfaction with our own fathers partly is this reason. There once were two more fathers, the group father or the king and the great spiritual father. They were also initiators, old men initiators. The initiators go, the mythological king goes, the political king goes, all of this falls on your father. He's supposed to do all of this? He's supposed to initiate you? He's supposed to represent God? He's supposed to be the king in the house? Are you kidding? This is a human being. And you want him to do everything that the other two kings did. Because we want that and we need that. And we've had it for centuries. And it isn't going to happen. Well, of course we mock our father. He feels totally inadequate. And besides, without those other shieldings, women move in and just wipe him out. Isn't that right? They know when power has dropped out of a certain position. Whoom, they're in there. We would do the same thing. When we feel the power had moved out of a woman, whoom, we move in. That's the way it is. So, therefore, we're talking about a serious situation here. Now, I'll tell you the strangest thing that's happened. We ran this down here, that the father has disappeared. The evidence of the father disappearing is that you're not moved by your father's compassion and suffering. And you say, oh, he didn't do this for me. He never took me fishing. It's all true. But the disappearance of the father then wasn't his fault. He was born into this situation the way we were. And when your mother started shouting, and you are complaining that your father didn't stand up to her shouting, and that's a genuine complaint, you got to realize he didn't have that energy in his body when those other two were gone. And when this unbelievable energy comes in, and he leaves you unprotected to that wild, hostile female energy that comes out sometimes. And you don't forgive him for that. And you were damaged by that. But we're not looking at whether it's right or wrong. We're not looking at whether the king should be put back. The king can't be put back. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about whether it's right or wrong. We're watching what happened. And what does it mean now? Well, one thing you can say it means is that this longing for the mythological king, who was it? Was it you talking this morning about that longing? Whether it's here or not, we want it. Was that you?
Alexander's longing.
Alexander's longing. That thing, we want that. We want that. That's in your genes. It's in our cells. Just as there is a powerful, lecherous, carnivorous longing in your cells, there's a longing for that holy king. And it isn't going to change. It's hardwired. So one thing that happens, for example, in the Iron John story, is that after he's been working in the kitchen a while, the cook says, take some food up to the king. He goes up to the king, but he's got his little cap on because his hair is golden. And the king says, "Take off your hat in my presence." And he says, why do you have your hat on? He says, "Well, I got sores in my head." The king says, "Get him out of here." Our visits to the king do not last very long these days. You know people who try to break into celebrities' rooms to be there just a couple of minutes? Do you know how you fall in love with a famous man or a famous musician or something like that? Those are attempts to visit the king. And how many crushes you have. You remember have crushes on older teachers and things like that. Those are attempts to visit the king. And when that doesn't happen, in our situation, when we don't have a father really, and we don't have that king, we don't know how to behave in the presence of the king. If you're going to visit the king, you have to have some discipline in your body, number one. He's not going to accept you. Why do you think all this discipline is going on in this story for? Because in the end, he's going to have to be in the presence of the king and stay a while. Do you hear me? And you're not going to get in the presence of the king unless you know about the firebird and the girl and the thing underneath the water. So there's a longing for the king. The king is that which in you is able to decide what you want to do for the rest of your life, what you want to do for the next hour, what you want to do for the next 6 months. It's also the one in you that makes you feel grandiose and beautiful and a little like God. When you were 2 months old, that was in you, and you weren't sure that you weren't God. Am I saying anything to you? Now, one of the things that's happening with drugs is that the drugs are giving you the feeling that you are in the king's presence. In a time with no father, the use of drugs is going to deepen and deepen and deepen and deepen because everyone wants that feeling of being in the king's presence without doing the discipline and the work with the feather and the diving and all of that to do it. So capitalism provides a perfect example. A shot of crack, a little cocaine, woo! I'm in the presence of the king. Do you hear me? What is the sense of putting police on the drug problem? It lies here. It lies in the absence of the father. 50% of the houses in the United States have no male in it at all. So what we're saying is that mythology would help these people thinking about drugs to understand actually what's going on. All the police in the world are not going to change the fact that our fathers are not in the house, and the ones that are not in that are in the house we're disappointed with for the wrong reasons. Because we wanted them to do things that was literally impossible for them to do. The fathers never initiated you in the first place. It was always done by unrelated older men. And secondly, your father's not a king and he's not a mythological divine king. He's just a human being. Your second father, who will be in the mentor category, you will have to go and find. And I'm saying to you, don't be foolish enough to think that you don't need one. To go up that ladder from father, mentor, king, God, you have to go to that layer to find an older man that you trust. But at a certain time, you'll begin to realize that everything you wanted from your father was all some kind of projection mistake. And all that stuff you were asking him for was hiding who was really there. And the one who is really there may be a weak man, so what? He may be a selfish man, so what? You hear me? So, you see, this thing, if we could rebuild the king and redo it, I don't think that's it. I think we have to learn to expect different things from our fathers. And we have to be able to tell our sons what we're not going to be able to do for them. And tell them why. I'm not a king. If you want a king, if you want a mythical king, I'm not it. Please realize there's one inside of you. And there's also God. So, I just want to lay that on you. In the time of no father, the hunger for the king deepens. It gets worse. And if we do not receive enough king, we are not able to help our children and our families and our wives.
James Hillman speaks on turning the father, suggesting ways in which men can move their imagination in regard to their relationship with the father. Bly and Meade follow with two more approaches to dealing with the father.
All right, we're going back or still forward with this cry to be fathered, which is such a basic call, basic complaint, continual concern in the men's groups, in psychotherapy, in the culture. Already in 1830s, de Tocqueville, who wrote the first major book about American democracy, said that if a country does not value traditions, and America doesn't because of the settlers coming over and turning its back on the old country, of course the place of the father becomes weakened. He already noticed that in 1830. So that's sort of something very basic to our culture. And we all, as Robert was showing, all suffer from that thing and are always searching out a father and complaining about bad government, bad programs, bad institutions, no mentors, bad teachers, complaining, wanting corporations, patriarchy, something is bad, and we're complaining against it and want to be fathered. And we all want a protector or a teacher or a noble institution or instruction, someone who knows, a roof, a truth, a place to be sheltered, or unbroken word, a good father. And we forget that in the myths, both the Greek myths and in the Hebrew myths, the Bible, the father is a murderer. Oedipus's father is a murderer. He sets him out exposes him to be killed because there's an oracle that said he'll be killed by his son. Or Abraham takes Isaac up on the mountain and is ready to put the knife to him. Sometimes we forget that part of the father's mythical place is to be a bad father. Part of the father's mythical place is to be a bad father, to be a killer, or to kill his son, or betray his son. And what are all those things about? Because they're very, very brutal and very terrible when they happen in our personal lives. And even the major last words of Jesus are, "Father, Father, why hast thou forsaken me?" So that's a fundamental tenet of the father world, is that the father is not reliable. The father is a killer. The father is a dark figure as well. And so that the search constantly for a good, protective, kind, instructing father misses the shadow of the father. And what I want to suggest is that our own complaints also don't understand the shadow of the father, that's archetypally given. The shadow of the father is archetypally given. And we don't want that shadow of the father, we want something else.
You mean we want a father without the shadow?
Or we don't want the father, yes, we don't want the father's shadow, or we feel only the father's shadow has been our father. Mm-hmm. Now, if we feel only the father's shadow has been our father, then we say, my father was a drunk, my father was a brute, my father was never there, my father let everything go to the mother, my father killed himself, we've narrowed the father to one single major trait, that is his shadow. And what we need to do is understand something more about that shadow. And we also need to understand how necessary first of all, we need to understand that the shadow is always going to be there, and you have your shadow with your sons, those of you who are fathers. and that you carry that ancestral shadow because it's archetypal. That is, it goes with fathering to be a bad father. Much as one wants not to be that oneself. Now, I want to say something about what the Father may have given you besides the shadow parts that you see. What I'm trying to say here is that we want the Father to have been, take me fishing, play baseball, be around for Christ's sake. He's never there. When he is there, he's only watching TV, or he's drinking beer, or there never was a father in the household, or whatever. What else was there? What bridge was he crossing over when you're standing at this place waiting for him to come over and complaining that he never did for you what you wanted him to do? Maybe during all that time he was coming over another part of the river and you never saw it because you insisted that he do this for you. So you're waiting at one bridgehead and he's making moves that you can't even see because of your hang up on what you think you need. And what you think you need, or what you feel you need from your father, as Robert said and as Michael said, is partly you want mentoring from your father, you want kingship from your father, you want the whole culture from you want far too much than any human being can give. And he may have been doing things that you've never even seen what he was doing because of your need for a specific kind of recognition. And Michael and I were working on this one time, and we thought that the Father, actual Father, provides protection and a roof over the head and the meals, but he doesn't know who you are. The mentor doesn't really care about you, but he sees who you are. So in all those Zen stories and rabbinical stories and mentoring stories, the teacher, and in the fairy tales, the teacher sees who the hero or the applicant or the student or whatever, what his qualities are. He sees into that person. He's ruthless. He gives him no food, no drink, no protection, no nothing, but he sees who he is and sends him on his way. Whereas the Father doesn't see who you are, but he gives you a roof. We want both from the same person. So when we go to a guru, we hang around the guru for 4 years, which is asking him to father you and give you protection. That's not his job. His job is to see who you are and send you on your way. And the Father, we resent because he doesn't see who we are. He never saw my gifts. He never recognized my special thing. He never blessed me. Maybe it's not the Father's job to do the blessing. Or maybe the Father did bless you in a way you haven't seen. Maybe the resentments keep you from the blessing. By that I mean is that the longer you wish you had a good father, the more you repeat the damages your father did to you. And I'm not saying that he didn't do them, but the more that you repeat those, the more you remain the wounded child. So what else is there to remember? Do you remember your father's hands? Do you remember his smells? Do you remember his laugh? Do you remember his physical nature? This physical quality of him? Do you remember the things that have something to do with the way your own body is? How you carry the same balls that he carries and his father carried, and so on. The ancestral spermatic body, the family jewels. What did he actually pay attention to? What were his interests? When you say he wasn't there for me, where was he when he wasn't there for me? Was he working? Was he being normal? Have you thought what it costs to be normal? How did he handle his depressions? What did he do with them? Drink them? Get violent? What did he do with his depressions? We focus on our needs and remain sons. And don't have any understanding of what his desires may have been or might be. and where they might have taken him or might still be affecting us. The hard part of it is to see that the things that you most resent may actually be in some way gifts. That it might be possible to turn those resentments, those angers, and those needs by reflecting them one more time. I'm thinking about, let's say the complaint is my father was always absent. He was never there. Well, John Keats, the poet, lost his father when he was 8 and wrote the sentence that he who is creative must create himself. The absent father leaves room for you to build your own structures. And if your friend complained that his father was dominating and on top of him all the time, then he wished to hell his father had been more absent. But you don't feel that because you resent having had an absent father. But that absent father also allowed you something. Now you can get hung up and say, I had to become a surrogate father, and I had to take care of the family, and I had to take care of the mother, and I actually became her husband, and so on. You're missing the fact that he was initiating you into being a father very early. And you can do something with that by his absence. Or take the one who is crooked, a schemer, may have been an embezzler, God knows what. A crooked father. Now suppose we were not just to say, well, he was the mercurial or hermetic or trickster father, but he also taught you through his negative example, through the shock of his negative example, and that's how teaching most comes, through shock, through being hit and hurt. The value of not being that. We learn a lot of what not to be through the example, through the bad example. Do you see what I mean? You get a reaction formation. So on the one hand, he may have been teaching you something about how to go the snake's path and have street smarts. But he also may have been shocking you into something else. Depends on what you do with the image of that father. Take another one, for example, the father who committed suicide. So we grow up thinking or fearing that we may be that way too, or that he was a coward, or that you don't understand what it was, or that you resent that he did that because he left you and you're angry as hell, left you with a family, left you with a mother, left you with the sisters or whatever. Suppose that father is imagined less as being cowardly or cop-out or whatever, and more possibly as he was willing to go to where you're going to go too, and was able to have some kind of understanding or some kind of boldness about the underworld and death, something that all of us want to stay away from. In other words, he led the way to the ultimate initiation. Or suppose,
James,
yes.
I met a painter in New York one day, and I said, what about your father? He said, my father was a thief. He said he worked in the garment district, and he went up to the 8th floor where they had good designs, and he brought them down to his floor, the 5th one, and made them. So he was a thief. And I remembered what you had said, and I thought to myself, he
hated his father,
yes.
That story you told me.
He could also have said, my father was very intricate and marvelous as an immigrant in getting family food for us in the family.
Right.
Now my question is, why does he always say the first one and not the second one?
Because I think he's still stuck in his own idealizations and needs. He still has an idealization of how a father should be, first of all. And second of all, he's stuck in his neediness. He still resents the father, which is a cop-out for you to stay as a boy. One more is, of course, the drinking. The drunken father, and all the negative effects of the drunken father that come up again and again in so many different ways. I don't need to repeat that because many of you know all of that through AA and through being in groups and so on. But it is possible also to imagine the father's capacity by drinking to escape from the normal world. And the drinking has a way out. It's called a way out, you know, escape and all that stuff. But escape for what and from what? And of course it's not ritualized in our culture, like so many other things doesn't work and so on and so forth. And we know that there's a biological aspect to it and so on. But still, imagine it. Move your imagination in these regards. Move your imagination in these regards. What could be the desire in these things that are so terrible for you as you go on with your thinking about your father? I'm assuming that we all feel rage. I am assuming a second step. I am assuming that we have all been furious, hurt, wounded, insulted, outraged by our missing fathers, or angry, or so on. So, respect that. That's a very important point, the anger. I don't want you at the same time, and I certainly don't want myself to stay there, because then I remain an angry child. And I also will miss what other benefits there were in that father. No matter what he was not just that. Because if you can imagine that he was only that, something terrible is happening. You're cutting yourself off from the whole line. It doesn't mean you're excluding the rage at all. You're helping to make the rage more precise and therefore more useful. Because you get to know what it is you really want and what you're really angry at, and then you're able to see some other things.
James is also saying that our idea of the father is sentimental. There is something in the father from the very beginning that involves betrayal of the son. It's in the wiring. It's in there. And for many of you, you're longing to have a mother instead of a father. Betrayal is not in the wiring of the mother. And she always tries to help in some way.
Smothering is in the wiring of the mother.
Yeah. But if you want to go to the father, you're not going to have a mother. And you're going to be angry about it, and you're partially angry at your father because he was a bastard. You're also angry at the universe because it put betrayal into the father.
And you're also angry at your father because he wasn't a good mother.
Right. I mean, this stuff will rip your guts. Can you feel it in your guts?
And this is central stuff. This is central stuff in our rage, in men's rage. And so we got to work with it. We have to work with it. Not escape it, but not be stuck in it. Because our energy then goes towards the father and doesn't go towards the brother. There is a shadow in the father. And we don't like the shadow. We don't like our own shadow. We don't like anybody's shadow. But that's the point. That's what life is. We want to remain American innocents. The shadow means that things are limited, that there's betrayal, that there's murder, that there's ugliness, that it's hard. And the relation to the Father teaches us that. I'm enraged with with you who are enraged with your mothers and fathers for not being enraged with other things. With not being outraged over other things. That's all.
Okay, good. Oh, good.
James mentioned that we were working on this. It's hard with such a large group. Everything we say only makes sense to certain men. Other men, it leaves them out. That's the way it is. You have to recognize that James's job is to push the edge of what we're imagining. He's been doing it for 50 years already. That's his work. So he's pushing at the edge of where we're comfortable. That's also part of the rage.
I got a thing to say when you're done.
All right. So Let me say it in 5 steps. The first step, which is being stated here and needs to be stated, see the darkness of the personal father. See the shadow. Name the shadow that one grew up under and into. In other programs, they say work through the denial that the father was in fact dark, if that's an issue. Then secondly, although they don't have to go in this order, feel the feelings, as is being stated, related to that personal father, the dark feelings. And for some, it is rage. For others, it's this incredible sense of loss. If the father was absent, it can be endless feeling loss. It can be various shades of sorrow and grief. And it also can be a constant fear. So, not to deny any of that or avoid it, but to get fully into it. Going back to what I was talking about with the Messiah initiation, the initiates are encouraged to go fully into the emotion that opens for them. And if it's fear, they're to tremble fully, except not by themselves, with someone on either side to make sure that they don't leave this world. And so if that's what the Father has bequeathed to the Son, then it's a business of feeling the fear fully, feeling the rage fully, whatever. Then this one, Robert has worked on for a long time, and that is the business of separating the Father himself from his temperament or the atmosphere he had in the house when we were a child. James is saying the same thing. There's more to the Father than just his temperament. What we tend to be overwhelmed with and recall primarily is the temperament of the Father. Then there's the work of separating that temperament from other things that he did. Say that's the third step. Or what Robert one time said, separate his doing from his temperament.
Temperament.
His doing from his temperament. If we take Abraham and Isaac, for instance, Abraham was doing a ritual action in a specific place related to a God that he must have felt very much deeply connected to, if we just look at that part. It doesn't mean that Isaac shouldn't be scared to death of him. It just means that at a certain point we can separate those two things. So that's that part. And then the way we were looking at it that one time was try to see the door that your father was standing by. And the reason for that is the old saying, the Father and the Son may serve different gods.
Very important. And so he can't bless you for the God you're serving because he's not a priest of that cult. He's serving another God.
When the young men went through the initiation process in many cultures, the older men would be watching the young men, and they see a man moving a certain way, a boy or a young man, and they say to each other, look at that. He's going that way. He puts his nose right into the wind. See the jut of his jaw? See the way he strikes straight out? He's the first one to step forward. He's going right in the direction of the warrior. And then they say, funny thing, his father was a great lover, still is. No wonder they could never talk. Then they say, so who's he going to go with? Let's have so-and-so go work with him because he's been working the ground of the warrior his entire life. And that becomes his mentor or his second father. And it's very clear at that point that if whatever the father said to that boy, the boy could not get. Whatever the boy said to the father couldn't get. They were in two different mythological worlds almost always. So the job then, at least that day we saw it as, try and identify the door that our fathers were standing at. The door of suicide, the door of alcoholism, the door of brutality, and what God is behind that door. And that's the fifth step, is trying to see the God behind the door. Because they used to say, in every curse there's a blessing. But you never get the blessing if you don't see the God that's behind the curse.
Good, very good.
And so it ends, finally, if it ends at all, with seeing the God behind the door that the father was stumbling to honor. So I think that's the 5 steps.
Beautiful.
That's the 5-step program.
Good.
Beautiful. That's good, Michael.
I'm going to show you something and then we'll have a break. All right, I'm going to say a little thing. It's an image that came to me, and I'll tell you how it came to me. Robert Moore was talking about the king, and I was aware of how much longing we have for the king. And you know, there's several steps and so on with the king. And I was thinking it's a little dangerous to talk that way about the king because we have a longing to go there immediately. You know that one? Americans try to do everything fast anyway. So therefore it's dangerous when someone presents the image of the king to you if you don't realize what a slow process it is and what is necessary before you get there. So here's my image. Coming into this question of the Father, do you whitewash the Father if you look for the other side? We're not talking about that. I want to give you the image of making an apartment for your Father in your head. If you have demons in your psyche, the chances are that the apartment you have for your Father in your head has got old torn linoleum. The demons have taken down his photographs and put up photographs of Stalin. Somebody took the sofas and threw them right out through the window without even opening them. Your father's apartment, the apartment you have for your father has got a lot of rat shit in it. And busted refrigerators, little black dogs tied to the refrigerator. So, now,
Good, go, man, go.
now, what I'm saying is, if you want a mentor, the mentor is going to have to live in that apartment. He's not going to live there. So your first job, if you want a mentor, is to enlarge your father's apartment. Now, when you enlarge your father's apartment, that means that first of all, you realize what a shitty place you have for him in your head. Even he wouldn't want to stay there. Secondly, you realize that you only got one room. This is a room for the dark side of your father. Look at all that stuff over there. That's it. I'm saying that to enlarge the apartment for your father means that you have one room for his dark side and the rage you have for him. Then you have to make another, add an addition to your father's apartment for that positive, incredible energy almost beyond your ability to grasp it. He was in this world too. He had just as much heart as you did. He had those problems and he dealt with some of that very well. Now that's building a two-roomed father apartment. Do you hear me? That is not whitewashing the father at all, because you always got your rage room to go to. But it's your obligation to see the other room. And when you've enlarged that apartment for your father and put up some decent things on the wall, even if it's a good painting of Kronos eating his children, that would be fine. You know, fathers enjoy good art. But don't just scrawl all over it with pig shit and think you've done it. It'll take imagination to do this. And after you have your mentor, your apartment where your mentor can live, then you have to realize that the inner king has to live there. And if you still have anger at older males, your inner king is not going to live in that apartment. And then you have to widen that apartment for your inner king. And if you've done that work of widening, then you have to realize that the king himself is going to live there. And you may have to change that to make it even larger for the king to come than your inner king. And then after you've got that, maybe you want God to live there, you're going to have to do still more work. And what I'm saying is you cannot jump from a passive hatred to your father or a passive affection to your father and go and invite the king in the New Age way, because it isn't going to work. That this work around your father has to be done first.
Well said, Robert.
That's good, Robert.